Yes, hello and good morning. It is great to have you guys here. Welcome, those of you here on our Kirkland campus, and those of you joining us online. It is great to have you with us, of course, as well. And let me be another voice to just say Happy Mother's Day to all you extraordinary women among us. We are so grateful for the impact that you have, and just grateful for your presence in our lives. And so we honor you. We are grateful for you. We hope you know today how deeply, deeply you are loved and appreciated. And it's good to see you guys too. You're just kind of tagging along. We understand. Well, yesterday morning, I was just going about my Saturday. Actually, I was driving to celebrate with a friend who was graduating with his master's degree yesterday when my phone went ding. A text had popped up, and I know all the rules about not looking at your phone while you're driving. Typically, I don't look down, but I looked down, all right? And I looked at it. Don't tell Officer Dave, who's out front doing traffic, all right? Because I'm sure there's a ticket in this somewhere. Anyway, my phone, the text said, Scott is sick, and we will need you to speak tomorrow. So, I'm suddenly awake, right? Good morning. And so I went and celebrated the graduation with my friend, and then went and took pictures of my son as he had his senior prom yesterday, and then I sat down to put this message together. So those of you who are here or logged on today to expecting to see Scott bring this great message today, and it is a great one. I actually got to, we heard it a little bit earlier in the week as a staff. It's a fantastic message. Come back in 2 weeks. He'll be bringing that then, all right? But if you always wondered what a shaggy-faced guy could do in 24 hours with a message, you're about to find out, all right? So buckle up, and we're about to make your dreams come true, okay? We are in this series called Reasonable Doubts, and we're looking at this question of doubts as it pertains to faith, because let's just be honest, all of us struggle with doubts at different times and of different kinds in our lives. It's not a question of when we deal with, if we'll deal with doubts, it's a question of when, and then how will we actually handle them when we come. This is a topic, of course, that comes up over and over again, and I've been in ministry for more than 25 years, and so I was kind of digging through the archives, looking for some talks, and I ran across and remembered a message from about 15 years ago that seemed to work pretty well, and we're going to see how it works today. So we just sort of readjusted it a little bit, made a few tweaks and adjustments, and we'll just see how it goes. And as I said, our starting point for this whole conversation of the last several weeks has been this idea that everybody has doubts. Everybody does. Because doubts are just being uncertain about something. And my goodness, there's plenty of uncertainty in our world, isn't there? Uncertainty in our relationships, uncertainty in our jobs, uncertainty on exactly how your weekend's gonna play out. I know something about that, right? Life is filled with uncertainty. And doubts are part of that, including doubts about faith. Questions about God and the Bible and Jesus and so on. But as Scott talked about a few weeks ago when we kicked off this series, just like everybody has doubts, everybody also has faith. And he defined faith as putting your trust in someone or something in spite of doubt or uncertainty. And we talked about how we basically do that every day. Whether we trust the person who's flying our plane, whether we trust the person, trust our car to work properly and along with everybody else's car running down the highway. When we sit down on a chair, we have faith that it will hold us. This is the kind of faith all of us live with every day. Everybody has doubts, everybody has faith. So this isn't an issue. This whole conversation is not about squishing out our doubts and eliminating all doubts from our lives. It's about asking, where can I put my faith? What can I trust even when I do feel some doubt? And the doubt that I want to talk about today is a very basic, fundamental one. It's the question, is there anybody out there? Is there even a God out there in the first place? Now, many of us, we'd be quick to say, of course there is. But have you ever really thought about why is it you believe that? Or for others who aren't sure about this question, have you ever stopped long enough to kind of think through, what's the evidence? What's the possible truth here? What can I learn? Does God really exist? Is he real? And if he is real, how can we know? Or do 90% of the people in the world simply believe in God because they're just too afraid to go through life without one? Could that be it? Now, over the years, I've had a lot of different people that I've talked with who've said something like this. They'll say, Wolfgang, I have this friend who has doubts about God. They're not sure he exists. And I don't know exactly what to say. I'm kind of stuck. What would you say? Well, today what I want to do is kind of walk through what might be part of a conversation around that question. Maybe it's one that you'd have at a coffee shop or at a restaurant or when you're hanging out with a friend, talking through some of these big issues. And my hope is that by talking this through, not only maybe will some of you feel more confident and more equipped to be able to have some of these conversations yourself, but also those who might be here who have these kinds of doubts, who never really slow down long enough to really think about them. And if you are in that place, whether you're online or you're here in the room, I want you to know we are so glad you're here. You are welcome here. I mean, it's our deep conviction that anywhere in the world, the church should be the safest possible place to bring questions about faith, to bring questions about God, to be able to bring those authentically into this environment. And if you have them, I'm glad you're here. We want to talk openly and honestly about them. Because if this is true, if there is a God, then let's be honest, the implications are enormous, aren't they? I mean, it changes everything about what matters in life, what life is all about in the first place. This is huge. So how would that conversation play out? Well, first thing, those kinds of conversations to me have to include a whole lot of listening. And we as people of faith have a tendency to want to tell everybody else what it is that we believe. But I've just discovered that in so many different settings, being willing to ask questions, being genuinely interested, being willing to talk about what someone else might believe, and have an honest dialogue and conversation is so much better than here's a quick presentation I have prepared for you, all right? But let's say as you're listening and as you're dialoguing with someone who's wrestling with faith, let's say you may have a chance to kind of share some of what it is you believe. Or if I was in that place, to share some of what it is that's informed and reinforced my faith in God. And if we were sitting in a place and I had a pen, I might kind of actually draw something on a couple pieces of paper. That's why I have this over here. We're going to do this old school, all right? Are you ready? Now, this marker's really strong, so front row, I'm just warning you right now. You will start to smell it quickly. But let's say the conversation begins. The first thing I might write down on the piece of paper or napkin or something like that is the word this. Bang, right? Bang rhymes with Wolfgang, all right? In case you were having trouble with pronunciation on that one. And I would say to your friend, hey, let's be honest. All of us have heard about this thing called the Big Bang, right? This huge moment that scientists theorize the entire universe came into existence, where there was this massive cataclysmic collision, explosion of matter and energy and gas that exploded into what we now know as the universe, that exploded into what we now know as life, and so on. And again, I'm not here to debate the Big Bang. That's a whole different conversation. But let's go to a really basic question. If this bang happened like that, where'd the bang come from? What about all that stuff that went into this explosion? Like, I don't mean to be silly or flip. Sincerely, where did it come from? Well, you say, well, it was a collision of gases in space. Okay, well, where'd the gases come from? You see, what we're dealing here with is the question of origins, original cause. Where did this come from? And science can help us understand so much about the things that did happen, but it sometimes struggles to help us understand these kinds of questions of origin. And this is such a big conversation. People very often believe that there's some sort of conflict between science and faith. Friends, I just haven't found that to be the case. When you actually dig into what's being discovered scientifically, along with the Bible and other issues of faith, you discover, when you come at it with a humility, that there is actually a beautiful resonance in these things. In fact, when you begin to study how modern science really developed, you quickly discover it actually grew out of a belief that the universe was rational, that there were logical sort of laws that governed things like physics and matter and so on. Hidden behind that is this belief that there was a law writer who designed all that. That's how modern science even got its start. That's why many of the great fathers and mothers of science, they were people of faith. And in so many ways, it was their faith that led them to believe there's order that I can begin to discover and explore. There's a deep, deep connection there. So these do not have to be in opposition where, oh, no, I don't believe in that faith stuff. I'm more of a science person. When you begin to learn and look, you'll see there's more overlap than you thought there might be. Whole nother conversation. But it brings us back again to this question, where did all of it come from in the first place? And very often people will be honest, well, we really don't know. They'll use a term like agnostic. I don't know. I'm just not sure. Well, it's maybe something to start to think about. Because you see, the Bible asserts that there is a God who has always existed, that there is a God who's eternal. And I know that's a hard concept for many of us to grab because everything we've known in our lives has a beginning, has an end. But this is the claim of the Bible, the opening words of the book. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the idea here is there is a God that always existed, who has no beginning and no end. He created the world out of nothing. For many people, they believe that's the logical explanation for where that bang come from. Now, there are other people that come up with other theories, and I would encourage you, explore those ones as well. Look at all the different ways that people try to understand this. There's nothing wrong with exploring different kinds of answers. Just explore it. Do it sincerely with an intellectual integrity as you dig into those conversations. But even the most ardent skeptic will acknowledge that some of these questions of origin are difficult to answer. I read a story one time about some scientists who were pretty impressed with the technology they developed and their abilities scientifically. And so they sort of set up this little deal with God. They said, God, we've sort of outgrown you. We don't really need you anymore. Would you just sort of get lost? And God says to these scientists, it's very interesting, but before I leave, can I give you one last challenge? I want to challenge you to a human-making contest. And of course, they're getting very confident in cloning and all these different kinds of technologies. They say, all right, we'll take you up on that. He says, no, I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it like old-fashioned way, like when I molded Adam out of the dirt. I want to do it that way. And the scientist said very confidently, no problem. And they kneel down to the ground. They begin to gather up a handful of dirt and says, oh, no, hang on a second. God says, get your own dirt, he says, right? Where did it all come from? Where did all the elements that we now see in action in our world, where did it all begin? That's the big question, this issue of origins. It's something we all got to wrestle with. And for thousands of years, people have struggled with this. They've studied it, debated it, dissected it, lost sleep over it. Because for many people, this question of origin, it's some of the most compelling evidence that there is actually a designer, a creator out there. That in the beginning, God created what is. And then I might take another portion of the napkin, and I might try drawing something like this. You know what that is? Can I give you a clue? It's Mother's Day. Isn't that pretty? Does she look nice? Yes, she's lovely. It's not the monster from the beginning of the new Doctor Strange movie. That's not it. Just relax for those of you who've seen that yet. Anyway, it's a human eyeball, right? Hopefully you've got two of them that work well. I know some folks who, of course, don't, but it's an amazing thing, the human eye. In fact, people, even the most hard skeptic, will acknowledge the engineering and capability of the human eye is absolutely stunning. You think about this for a second. This little eyeball can adjust from seeing and focusing on a star billions of miles away, and then in a split second refocus on something as tiny as that piece of spinach in the person's teeth right in front of you. You know what I'm talking about? Well, I'm often that person, I'll be honest, okay? It's amazing. The refocusing capability of the human eye is something that has never been replicated, as good as your iPhone 13 Max is, right? And then I might remind them, now this little 1-inch eyeball that's rolling around in your head right now, it has 130 million parts, sending millions of impulses to the brain every second to provide this unbelievable thing we experience called vision. And I would ask, now honestly, do you believe that this extraordinary thing that you rely on every day, do you think its capabilities are the result of some random, accidental collision of gases and matter in space? Or do you believe that there's actually some kind of an engineer or designer behind it? For me, an engineer or designer makes far more sense. Maybe you come to a different conclusion, but you've got to ask the question. What do you think? It's interesting. Even Charles Darwin himself conceded that this is a challenge. This is something from Origin of the Species, his famous book, to suppose that the eye, and he goes on, but with so many parts all working together, kind of consolidating, he said, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. Did Darwin really say that? He really did. Now, sometimes people take this out of context and they just pretend that, well, see, even Darwin didn't believe his theory. That's not true. He goes on to try to explain very imaginatively how that eyeball might have actually formed. But it highlights the reality that how this thing came to be is a real challenge for those who believe in such accidental, kind of natural progression over time. It's perplexing with no simple answer. Other ways to try to illustrate and explain this. Say, for instance, you're driving up in Everett and you see one of those big giant jets at the Boeing plant up there. You do not first think, my goodness, the last tornado that went through a junkyard put together a plane, right? That makes no sense at all. Some of you are in this room. You are the engineers behind that. You know that every little detail is painstakingly worked over and assessed. The amount of work that goes into engineering something as complicated as an airplane. Friends, that doesn't even compare to the human body or the physics that surround us and the universe. When you walk into your office and you see a new computer sitting on your desk, your first thought is, man, my paperclips finally got their act together, right? It makes no sense. I don't care how long a time you give it or what random forces enter into the picture. It's difficult for me to conceive that over billions of years, with whatever forces in play, that the stapler, the pens, and the picture of my family are going to form into a new MacBook Pro. All right? Give it however long you want. There's an engineer behind that. They live in California, of course. They're glad to tell you that, right? That formed that thing, that put it together. It just doesn't happen on its own. There's a scientist named Dr. William Bradley. He says this: the mathematical odds of assembling a living organism are so astronomical that nobody still believes that random chance accounts for the origin of life. If you took all the carbon in the universe and put it on the face of the earth, allowed it to chemically react at the most rapid rate possible, and left it for 1 billion years, the odds of creating just one functional protein molecule would be 1 chance in 10 with 60 zeros after it. That's a really big number. And that's for one protein molecule, let alone the billions of molecules that make up each of our lives and our bodies. Just the sheer physiological wonder of the eye, our ear, our skin, our sense of touch and smell, our emotional and mental capacities. Which takes more faith? To believe that that all just happened by accident, or that there was a custom builder behind the whole story? And can you imagine here on Mother's Day, a mother looking into the face of her newborn baby and saying, what a lovely little random collection of gases you are, right? Well, there's gas involved, but it's a different kind of gas, right? And let me quickly say as well, as we're talking about this, the question of how this creation happened is a whole nother discussion. And I simply don't have time to get into it today. It would take more than 24 hours to prep that one. But brilliant minds debate how long it takes, it might have taken for this creation to unfold, or this process while all was involved in it. They'll point to different pieces of evidence, some that indicate maybe a shorter time period, others that indicate a longer time period. And friends, I deeply believe there is room for different views on some of these questions. I think we have to be humble and open, both when it comes to how we understand and interpret the scientific data, as well as how we assess the biblical data and perspective as well. In fact, I would say, and this is just a conviction that I have, I believe that the first 3 chapters of Genesis that include the creation account in the Bible, that those 3 chapters are primarily concerned with the question of who created and not how it happened. Does that make sense? I believe that's ultimately trying to point to this God as the creator, not trying to give specific details on exactly how it all played out. Again, people debate this, they disagree about it. It's a conversation for another day. But to someone wrestling with whether or not there was a God, I would say, in light of this complexity and where these origins came from, you're gonna have to process this. How do you explain that? What's your theory? Does the evidence for an intelligent designer imply that there's something more at work? There is someone out there. And the Bible says it this way. Even nature points to it. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words to the ends of the world. I would just say, look at your kids when they're sleeping. Go spend a weekend out in the Olympics. Go scuba diving in Hawaii on those reefs. Look up into the sky when it's actually clear around here and you can see all those stars. And just try to calculate the odds that all of that just happened by accident. I'm not sure which takes more faith, friends. I've come to my conclusion. To me, these things point to there being more, but you've got to come to yours. But please don't just ignore it. Don't just look the other way, keep scrolling through Instagram and log on to another show on Netflix. Take time to wrestle with these questions because they matter. They matter. There are so many different ways we could talk about this idea of, is there anyone out there? Maybe if I was talking with someone, I would bring up something as horrific as the Holocaust or some of the genocides that have happened in human history. Maybe I'd even point to the atrocities that are right now taking place in Ukraine. I mean, why is it that there is almost universal anger and agreement that those atrocities are just wrong? I mean, if we're just highly sophisticated products of chance, how do you account for this near universal sense of moral right and wrong? Could it be chance? Or is it more logical to believe that there is a moral God at the center of the universe who made human beings in his image and wove this sense of right and wrong into their hearts? Could that be? Now, incidentally, for a lot of people, their doubts about God don't have anything to do with the origins of the universe or the complexity of the human eye or even the atrocities they see in the world. For a lot of folks, what gives them pause about this idea of a God is the atrocities that have been perpetrated by people who carry the name of God. It's not about the theory or philosophy or science at all. It's more about what they've seen in the lives of people who claim to be followers of God. The hypocrisy, even the violence. And that is a huge question. Believe it or not, that's actually what Scott was going to be speaking about today. And he is going to be speaking about in 2 weeks on that very subject. It's so important. You'll want to be here. You'll want to invite someone to be with you as well. Because these are all big things to think about. Questions of origins, questions of complexity, questions of right and wrong. But very often in my conversations, it isn't this kind of theoretical and intellectual stuff that matters most. The stuff that typically matters most in those kinds of conversations are stories. Stories of the way that God has worked. Stories of the way that lives have changed after they claim to have this encounter with God. Many people are very open to hearing stories. It's hard to argue with the story. I love to hear stories and to tell stories. And so in that situation, I might tell a little bit of my own story. I'd probably just draw a little stick man like this. Make sure they're clear it's me, I'd say, that's me, in case you wondered. And basically, this is my story. And actually, it's kind of the story of a lot of folks that I know who experienced God working in their life. See, when I was little, before I could grow the beard, I believed or understood there to be something beyond myself. I believed in a God. Sort of wasn't sure exactly what that was all about, but had some sense that there was something out there. And I was raised in an environment and in just by my own kind of nature that my life needed to be about working my way up to that God. That somehow if I prayed enough, or I was good enough, or I showed up at church enough, or I did enough good things, and I tamped down all those bad things that I secretly struggled with, that if I could work my way up that ladder, somehow this God would be pleased with me. He'd be okay with me. He would forgive me. He would love me. He would accept me. But the frustrating part that I quickly discovered, like many other people have discovered, is when it comes to a staircase like this, you never know where you stand. You never know if you've been good enough, if you've prayed enough, if you've loved enough, if you've beaten down all those bad things enough. And then one day, after trying for a very long time to win at this game and finding myself bitter and frustrated and angry and secretly struggling with all kinds of things I would have been so ashamed for people to know about me, there came a day when the tables were turned, when I finally understood that the unbelievably loving and gracious God of the universe did an incredible thing. Instead of sitting at the top of those stairs saying, Wolfgang, when are you going to get your act together? He came down those stairs to touch my life. He entered into our lives to love me, to forgive me. He sent Jesus, God in the flesh, to be born in a little town called Bethlehem, and to face and deal with all the same struggles and temptations, even the suffering and pain and disappointment that so many of us deal with in our lives. He's not a stranger to that, the Bible says. He came and lived among us. The only difference between us and him is that he was able to navigate this life without ever stepping in one of those potholes, without ever violating that sense of moral right and wrong that I violate pretty routinely in my life. He never did anything like that. He gave his whole life to loving people and teaching people, helping people that others overlooked, the forgotten, the poor, the ignored. And then, at about 33 years of age, he willingly was nailed to a cross as a substitute payment for the sins of people like me. This God, who came down to me, not demanding me to get up to him, but came down to me, was willing to give his life out of love for me. And then I discovered what he says in Revelation 3:20, Jesus speaking, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens that door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me." God says, I'm not just waiting for you at the top of these steps. He says, I'm willing to come right into your life. In fact, I'm knocking, waiting for an invitation from you to step into your world and into your life and really get to know you and you really get to know me. And one day, for me at a relatively young age, that's what I did. I opened that door. I invited him into my life. And can I tell you, my life has never been the same since. Certainly not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Plenty of people here, glad to tell you all stories about that. But my goodness, my life's been changed. And I've experienced some pretty great things in my life. I remember what it was like to be a hormone-raging teenager who first thought they were in love. Remember that moment? And those sweaty palms come together to hold hands. You remember that? That was pretty good first time, right? I remember the first time I leaned over and kissed my now wife, Lori, on the forehead. Said, I love you. And she puckered up and she said a little lower. And I said, I love you. That's pretty great too, But can I tell you, there's nothing like the love of this God. There's nothing like the peace and the confidence that knows no matter what you walk through, you do not walk alone. There's nothing like it. And I'll tell you, it's only by my decision to open that door that I finally experienced him holding my hand in the dark, strengthening my marriage when it was weak, deepening my faith when it was shaky, renewing my hope when I felt like it was running out. And I would say to your friend, just like I'd say to you, It can't be explained. It has to be experienced. Or to put it another way, you can hang around the airport all you want, but never get on the airplane. And you'll never know what it's like to fly. You can hear about the roar of the ocean, but if you've never been there, if you've never felt the sand between your toes and the spray of the surf on your face, you will never know. And you can go a lifetime learning about God, theorizing about his existence, even going to church, singing songs. But until you open that door and you let him in and experience his love personally, you will never really know it. And that experience is available to anyone who will let him in by opening that door. And then I might wrap up our conversation with one of my very favorite verses in all the Bible, Psalm 34. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Sure, you still got questions. Sure, there are things you don't understand. Join the club, friend. There's things I don't understand, I wrestle with. But here's what I've learned to do. I'll just taste. And I've discovered the Lord is good. And I'd say to them, why don't you do that? Why not give it a try? Why not take some next steps to keep seeking for answers about God? Because let's be honest, 30 minutes in a flip chart and a TV with some slides, we can't close the case on all this stuff. This is a lifetime of exploring and examining. But the question's too big to ignore, friends. There's some great resources that are out there to help. Many of you have heard us talk about Alpha. Alpha is this unique environment where you can come, no matter what it is you believe, and ask these hard questions to wrestle through these big questions of faith. We just started another round of Alpha. Unfortunately, it's totally full, but we'll be doing another Alpha in the future, and we'd love to let you know about that. Keep your ears out. It's a great place to have a conversation about these questions. And there are some great resources you can lean into now, books and other resources that I'd love to help you with. I'd be happy to share. In fact, what I want to ask you to do is if you're interested in kind of digging deeper into some of those questions, take that connection card that you received, those here in the room, or those of you online can scan this QR code and just mark, I'm exploring questions about God. Put your name and email on there, I'm exploring questions about God, and I'll send you a list of some resources that I would recommend. And many of them will be Christian, they'll point to these issues, but to be perfectly honest, some of them will not be Christian. Because I don't think there's anything bad about exploring how other people are trying to answer these questions, to really explore them and wrestle with them for ourselves. So I'll send you a couple of titles that are folks that I completely disagree with. But there's no reason we need to be afraid of asking those questions, sincerely searching for those truths. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Because many of us, we have asked those questions. And along the way, we have learned that it's not about striving and trying and working and digging deep. It's about opening the door. It's about saying, come in. I'm just willing to taste. I don't understand it all. I'm still learning, but I'm willing to open the door and invite you in to taste and see that the Lord is good. That this God who came down the stairway really does love us, and that invitation is open. So as I finish up here, I want to say a quick thing to two groups of people. First is to those who are in this room or online who you believe this stuff. You're in, you've tasted, you've seen how good the Lord is. You have friends that have doubts about God. And if you're willing to listen and share some of your story, you might be amazed at what God will do. So I'd encourage you, have a coffee like this, have a conversation like this, invite someone to come with you for this series. Next week, we'll be talking about doubts about the Bible. Is this a book we can trust? Why? How do you read it? These kinds of things. We'll be talking about that next week. And I'd love to see you here. And then second, for those who are here and you're undecided about God, you're not sure about these questions, you've never really wrestled them through or you're not sure, I want you to know again, I am so glad you're here. I know on Mother's Day, we often have folks whose moms said, hey, I want you to come with me to church, and maybe that's you. And if that's you, I'm thrilled you're here. I hope you see this is just a real place with real people who are trying to figure out how to do this thing. This is a place where you can bring your questions. But let me urge you not to let the questions slip your mind. Not to just take mom out to lunch and get back to life and forget. Because friends, the stakes, the implications of this are way too high. to treat casually. And if we can help, we would love to help. Seek answers, ask questions, do it sincerely. Check out the resources by filling out that card. Talk to a friend. Just don't ignore the issue. Because if there is a God who came down these steps for you and for me, it changes everything, friends. Taste and see that the Lord is good. I have, and I've never regretted it. This room full of people who have and who never regretted it, whose lives are being changed by this God who didn't only make all that we see around us, but who wants to step into each of our lives out of love for us. And so here's what I want to ask you to do. Would you bow your head with me? Let's just pray to finish this time. The band's going to come in just a moment and lead us in a last song. But as they're getting in place, I want to just pray. God, I thank you. I thank you. I am convinced personally there is none like you. And sure, part of it is, where did this all come from in the first place? What about all the complexity? What about the moral right and wrong? What about all these philosophical issues? But God, for me, the proof has come in tasting and seeing that you are good. It hasn't always been easy, it hasn't always been smooth, but the beautiful good news that's changed my life and so many others is that you walk with us even through the hard stuff. That we are never alone, as this next song sings about. That we are never abandoned. That you are for us. And so we aren't on our own. You came down to us so we could have new life. And if there are people here today who have questions about that, who want to talk to someone or pray with someone about that, after the service, there'll be folks hanging out down in the front, each of the corners of the room here. They'd love to talk with you, help you find the resources you need. Just don't ignore these questions, because they matter far more than you can ever know. Is there someone out there? Friends, there is. His name is Jesus, and he loves you. And I pray you'll open the door to him. And I thank you, God. I thank you for your goodness. I pray it all in the name of Jesus.